There's a lot of material in the second half of Beowulf to go through, and even though there's some spots that you skipped over in the story, I do kind of want to summarize those spots just so that you know what happened. On this main page, I put in for you a few images that, I don't know, kind of help with visualization of this section. Over here, you have the battle between Beowulf and Grendel's mother. Grendel's mother has a lot of different incarnations. She sometimes looks like a woman, sometimes she doesn't. So that varies, but you can see the fierceness of their battle here. Down here, much later in his life, Beowulf has a battle with a dragon, which you read toward the end of the piece. And so he goes out in a blaze of glory, pun intended, with the dragon. And then over here, I put in some treasures. So one of the features of the middle part of the book is that Beowulf gets a lot of treasures from Hrothgar for his victories over Grendel and Grendel's mother. And I just thought that I would share with you some visuals on that. This is a torque. One of the things that Beowulf gets is a golden torque. It's a neck piece that a man could wear. And so this is not Beowulf's torque, it's just an example of a torque so that you could see that. He gets lots of prizes and presents from Hrothgar and Welchtheo. And one of them is a torque, and it's not a term that we use frequently. So I just thought I would mention it. It's like a necklace, sort of. And then this is an image of a helmet with gold. The Anglo-Saxons typically had helmets that were for their heads, the sides of their heads, and then down over their noses. This face piece was more ornamental than actually functional in a war setting. But both of these pieces were discovered in a burial site called Sutton Hoo in Scandinavia. Sutton Hoo was a ship that was discovered buried, and on it was tons of Anglo-Saxon treasure. And it's it's a place you can go now and visit, and like a place of interest to go and see where they dug up all of these treasures, just tons of gold and arms and shields and all that stuff. So we get a good view into the riches of the Anglo-Saxon people through that archaeological excavation. And there's a lot more if you wanted to Google it. It's Sutton, capital HOO, Sutton Hoo. And that was 20th century, I think, that they discovered that. So I just thought I'd give you a few visuals on the items for today. If you go to the website, I think that the website that Blackboard will be available to you on Monday, Tuesday at the latest, because that's when classes start technically at STC. So this week 3 is kind of an overlap. You'll see week 1 and 2 in Blackboard when it's available to you, and then you'll also see, week 3 and so on. Even though I put week 3 here just in case. But the syllabus is finished. They gave me access to the syllabus, so that one's done. And we have our faculty meeting for STC on Saturday. So I'm assuming any updates that I might need to give you will be available when we officially open up Blackboard next week. This week is week 2 though, because I want to make sure that we have enough time to read our assignments. So we're just digging right in. You should have looked at the background information on the Middle Ages, which is a page in this site. I did not write this. This is from the English department. They've basically taken the information from, I don't know, 25 pages or 22 pages of the textbook and distilled it down into the basic information here about the Middle Ages, because we're transitioning from Anglo-Saxon into the Middle Ages this week. On Thursday, I'll be talking about the first part of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, which is a piece from the Middle Ages. And that moves into, like, the 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th centuries. So there's some background here about that. This is a very brief summary of that text. If you feel like it's too brief, then you can go to your book and take a look at those pages. I did edit this slightly, especially when it comes to the terminology that is listed here for Beowulf and Sir Gawain and the Canterbury Tales, which are the two pieces that we will read from the Middle Ages. And the reason that I did that is because I've already looked at the midterm. The midterm, I know that it's a long way out. It's the week before spring break in March. But I just want to explain to you how that's set up, because I'm using the departmental, we have to use the departmental midterm. So the way that the test is set up, there are, I think 15 short answer questions as a portion of the exam. And what they'll do is they'll give you a term or a character or a concept from your reading and ask you to write about the significance of that thing. Now, there might be 15 that you have to do on the test, but there are like 40 that are in a bank, and it will just be random which 15 terms you get. So I'm trying to make sure that with these sorts of lists that you're exposed to all of the possible terms that might come up on your midterm. They're not all going to be on the midterm, but I want to make sure that whatever one you get, it's been presented to you in the material. So this list here is coming from that. And you know what a mead hall is because we talked about it on Thursday last week. But if we didn't and that showed up on the midterm, then you'd be like, well, it is mentioned in the text that there's a mead hall, but I'm specifically bringing up the terms and things that I have seen on the midterm so that they'll be a little more familiar to you. So if they're listed here like this, it means that those are terms that may show up on the midterm, I guess is what I'm saying. Same thing when we talk about Sir Gawain, I'll go over some of these terms on Thursday, and Canterbury is coming up next week, and we'll put that in too. So when you look at these background, I mean, you might be tempted to go, oh, okay, I remember the Middle Ages from my history class, skim, whatever. I'm trying to point out that a more careful attention to this background information and maybe making notes on these things would help you prepare more completely for the midterm exam. The midterm is 20% of the grade. So any questions on this background info on the Middle Ages? Anything that came up here that you have questions about? Feel free to unmute or put things in the chat and I will respond to them. I'm not, my true nature in teaching is not a lecture-based situation. Usually it's more of a discussion in class. Usually I'll go over some things in class, take questions, and then usually I have something for the students to work with either in groups or with me kind of leading them through it. And it doesn't really work this semester with this amount of material and with us being virtual. So I know that it seems like I'm lecturing a lot, and I'm conscious of that because it's kind of uncomfortable for me. But today we're going to talk about the ending part of Beowulf. So hopefully you were able to read that. I'm going to open up my PDF and go to where we left off last week. So if you have a PDF that you need to make notes on, I really do recommend Kami. It's free. You'll see that I've annotated my text so that I can go through it with you today. There were two spots that you were able to skip. Let me see, the one that we're starting with today is right after Beowulf kills Grendel. So Right here, this is the part where Beowulf rips the arm off of Grendel and then displays it in the mead hall. And after that part, then there's a section that you were not required to read. And I want to go over that. I marked it here as skip, but I do want to just summarize what happened just so that you'll be aware. I'm not going to ask you to include it in any of your responses or your discussions, or you know, it's not part of the midterm or anything like that. But this is a story that's like continuous. So I'll just go through and summarize those parts, and then give you the notes on the parts that you did read, and you can ask questions. So the section after that is called Celebration at Harrod, and obviously Beowulf's success with killing Grendel turns into a celebration, and they throw a big feast for Beowulf and his glory. Hrothgar orders up food, and they have a big meal. They bring in a minstrel who sings two ancient stories. One is the story of Sigmund, and you can tell that they're doing that in the text when it's italicized and there's like extra spacing. That's called a caesura, that space in there. Poetically, it's called that. But it's to demonstrate that this is when the minstrel is kind of like singing for their entertainment. And he's singing about Sigmund, who was a dragon killer. And we know at the end that Beowulf becomes a dragon killer. But what he's doing is he's equating their greatest hero with Beowulf. Beowulf's like the new greatest hero of the Danes. So singing that story honors Beowulf. Also, he tells the story of, there's another one down here. I'll come back to that. Of called the Finn Saga. And you can see it's the same kind of spacing to show that the minstrel, just like they would sing Beowulf, they're singing the story of the Finn Saga. The Finn Saga is a story about, from their history, about how this Danish princess was married off, but in hopes of keeping peace between her and between the Danes and the Frisians, but it doesn't work. And when her brother comes to visit her, violence pours out and there are deaths all around. It's a story of revenge and grief. I put a note over here on the side because Hildebert, the princess and the queen of the Frisians, she loses her brother, her husband, and her son in those battles. And in a way, it foreshadows the grief of Grendel's mother, which is not known yet to us as we're reading, but since you've read already what happens with Grendel's mother, we can see that there's a little bit of foreshadowing here, that the grief of a woman, of a mother, is formidable. And so that's a long section. Another thing that happens in the section that we skipped over is Beowulf gets a lot of gifts. Hrothgar showers him with, you know, everything from flags to chainmail to jewels and horses and all kinds of stuff. Obviously, he's very grateful to Beowulf for his valor in killing the monster. So this is the Finn Saga. It goes on for quite a while. At this feast, the queen, Welshseo, comes up and she actually speaks to Beowulf. She gives him some refreshments, you know, some mead. She pours for him. She thanks him. She's very gracious. She even later on gives him some ornament that he can wear around his neck. So he gets, you know, all kinds of gifts. Here's where she gives him that torque that I was showing you on the opening page over here. This one, well, not that one, but one that looks, that's that sort of a thing. So he is decked out with all kinds of riches. Now he's not going to be able to keep these things, and he doesn't. He's going to give them to his king, but there is worth in them yet, and the worth is that he's able to provide them to his king. So the fact that he's going to return to Geatland or Geatland with all of these treasures that Hrothgar has given him makes him very valuable to the king because he needs an arm, he needs, you know, to have wealth to run the country. So he is going to give all of it to the king, and the king, Higelac, will give some of it back to him. But mainly, he's securing his position as a worthy warrior, not only by the deeds that he's doing, but also by the prizes that he's able to take back and then fortify his country with in terms of gold and all that other stuff that he can give to his king. At the end of this section that we skipped, there is some foreshadowing. As the feast is sort of winding down, there's this narrative element that says, she moved then to her place. They're talking about Walchtheo. Men were drinking wine at that rare feast. How could they know fate, the grim shape of things to come, the threat looming over many thanes at night, as night approached and King Hrothgar prepared to retire to his quarters. So there's a little bit of a suggestion that even though they're having this celebration, there's still an impending threat, that Grendel wasn't the end of the scourge that has been put upon the Danish people. So at the ending part of the part that you skipped, there's that little suggestion that it's not over. And then we have the section called Another Attack. And this is a part that you should have read. So this is a description of Grendel's mother. Now, Grendel's mother does not have a name. She's just called Grendel's mother. And she is a fierce warrior in her own right, maybe even more fierce than Grendel. When Beowulf fights her and a little bit later on, it's back and forth. And for a while, it looks like he might lose. And maybe that's because she's, getting revenge for the death of her son. She's enraged, she's grief-stricken, and she wants revenge for the death of Grendel. She must have seen Grendel's body disfigured, dismembered, and seen him die. So she is coming to get revenge for that. So she comes to the mead hall to get her revenge. And there's a description much like when Grendel came to the mead hall, except that she's a lot more fierce. Grendel was more bloodthirsty. Grendel was more like, oh, let me see if I can, eat these men. And Grendel's mother is, enraged, wanting revenge. So there's this description. She's called, the troll dam, the hell brute, she's called all of these things because she wants to go and get this revenge. And there's a description here of Cain's clan and how they ended up where they did, how they were forced down into fearful waters because Grendel and his mother lived below this marshy fen area that's kind of barren and disgusting, and they live under there in an underwater cave. So there's a description of how they were outlawed there. But she goes to Heorot to do battle, it says. And she comes into the mead hall at that same night to get her revenge. Now, Beowulf is not there, and neither is Hrothgar. So she comes in and attacks, and she, the guards that are there try to defend the place, but it doesn't work because she's so, fearsome. And she takes one of the men from the mead hall. Turns out that it was one of Hrothgar's best advisor, Ashera. And that pains him greatly. And she runs away with him. She gets spooked and she runs away with his body and, is kind of like ripping into him as she runs. So the way that the narration continues is that obviously there's a ruckus. Hrothgar and Beowulf both come to the mead hall and see what has happened, and immediately Hrothgar reacts. This is right around line 1320. Hrothgar is beside himself with grief at the loss of his advisor, Ashera. His name is right here in the text, or I wrote it over there too. So he says, rest, what is rest? Sorrow has returned. They only had one day really to celebrate and think that they were safe from Grendel before there was this other attack. And in some ways it's even worse because it has pierced the inner circle of Hrothgar's trusted advisors. He says, sorrow has returned, alas for the Danes, Ashera is dead. And he says that he was a soulmate to me. And I think, obviously we have to read that with a different view than we would in 2021. He doesn't mean a romantic soulmate. He means this is like my right hand guy for my life. Hrothgar's an old man. He's a king. He's been through many battles. And apparently, Ashera was the guy who helped him to get through those things and advise him and help him as be the best king that he could be. And so Hrothgar is just grieving and crying and sad, and he's upset that this has happened. Where she is hiding, glutting on the corpse and glorifying her escape, I cannot tell. So it just turns his stomach that his advisor's being eaten by this beast. He talks for quite some time about his feelings about that, and then he says, I think I know where she lives. He describes the location where the Kane's clan creatures live, including where Grendel used to live, and then also Grendel's mother, how they're fatherless and the children of Cain, and so on and so forth. So they live in this like cold moorland that's sort of barren and just what you would expect from a monster. It's not homey, let's put it that way. And he says it's a few miles from here. So he's sort of giving Beowulf directions, and he says, do you think you would dare to go and try to take care of her and get rid of her? And he says that down here. The gap of danger where the demon waits is still unknown to you. In other words, I know that you would be fighting her in a place that you are unfamiliar with. I mean, think about the difference between the battle between Beowulf and Grendel and the battle between Beowulf and Grendel's mother. The locations are crucial. Even though it's not his mead hall, it's a human environment. And Beowulf fights Grendel in that human environment of the mead hall. He has that advantage. But in going to fight Grendel's mother, he would have to go to her lair, which he knows nothing about. He doesn't know the lay of the land. He doesn't really know what the creature looks like. He wasn't there when Ashera was taken. So he's completely blind going into this. So that's why Hrothgar says, where the daemon waits is still unknown to you. So seek it if you dare. It's a little bit of a challenge and also a little bit of an out. I understand that you might not want to go because you probably don't know what it's like where she lives, and that's definitely a strike against you in succeeding. If you go, I will compensate you greatly. And then he agrees. In the next section, Beowulf agrees, probably for two reasons. He can increase the wealth that he can return back to his country, and also he can increase his legendary status. I mean, fighting Grendel was pretty heroic and ripping off his arm, but if you can level up by killing the Grendel's mother, who is even more fierce and in a place that is unknown, then you can get all kinds of extra hero points for that. So Beowulf responds to him, and he responds to him saying that he's going to take care of business, but he also lectures Hrothgar a little bit. And I don't know if you picked up on that when you were reading it or not, but he kind of says, suck it up. You need to be a king for these people. And I know that your guy got killed, but geez, we go into battle all the time, and, suck it up. He says that a little bit later on. He says, wise sir, do not grieve. It's always better to avenge dear ones than to indulge in mourning. In other words, it's always better to go and get Weird and get your revenge or get money than to sit around crying. Crying doesn't solve anything. And then he says on this line, bear up and be the man I expect you to be, which is a reversal, because you wouldn't say that to your grandfather, right? Man up, grandpa. He's just, but he's reminding him that he has a responsibility to his people. Maybe we could say that as we get older, we get more sentimental and our emotions get the better of us sometimes. And Beowulf's just reminding him, look, you have a responsibility to be the king of your people. So he says, she will not get away, not to her dens underground, nor upland groves, nor the ocean floor. She'll have nowhere to flee to. Endure your troubles today. Don't worry, I'm going to take care of it, but you better straighten yourself out. Deal with the fact that your guy is dead. So he springs to his feet and he goes, and he tracks with some of the men to the location where Grendel's mother lives. And they track her footprints, but they also track the piles of gore of Ashera's body, right? And then his head is right there by the shore of the water. And so they track her to her lair, and they're all sort of standing there looking at the body of water that you have to swim through to get down into the underwater cave where she lives. And they're looking at it, and it's like swirling serpents and bloodthirsty creatures and like blood and all kinds of gross stuff like floating there. And everybody sort of gazes at it, and Beowulf puts on his armor. He is going to jump in there, not knowing how deep it is, what he has to do, but he's definitely going to wear armor. There's another difference also between the first battle and the second battle. In the first battle, he fought Grendel the way Grendel fights. In this battle, he's going to wear his armor, which is a good thing, because if he didn't wear his chainmail, he would have died like almost immediately. Grendel's mother, as he sinks through the water toward her lair, she knows that he's there, and she goes and just starts grabbing at him with her talons. And but just think of the boldness and the guts that it would take to put on your armor. And he just sort of unceremoniously dives in. First, he says to, before he jumps in, he says to Hrothgar, by the way, if I die, can you make sure that my king gets all that treasure and look after my men for me? Because like that would be my duty. And so he's fully aware of the fact that this might be a mortal battle. And then he jumps in. After these words, the prince of the Weather Geats was impatient to be away and plunged suddenly, without more ado. He just jumps in, and immediately Grendel's mother comes upon him. Now you can imagine her however you want to, but you have to imagine her with talons. She has to have arms because she carried Ashera away. She has to have legs because she can run. Her size depicted in different ways. So you're kind of left to imagine the worst possible creature. It's the same thing with Grendel. His appearance is not described. And so there are many different depictions of those creatures. The dragon, I mean, everybody knows what a dragon's supposed to look like, so that one less so. But these two, you know, you're just supposed to think of a fierce, fierce warrior type creature. She's got to be muscular and strong and all of that, because she sensed him, and she comes up to meet him, and she immediately attacks him. She's a formidable opponent. Where was the part I wanted to say about the Amazons? Did I pass that already? Because I talked about that last period. Yeah, I want to back up to this spot, and then I'll join back up when he's underwater with her. But I skipped this part about her being compared to an Amazon warrior. I think that that's important. I'm going to put a text note here, because it's a mythological illusion. In mythology, the Amazon warriors were fierce female soldiers, and they're depicted. I don't know, that Wonder Woman movie is out right now, and she's an Amazon in I guess the comic book world, but they're kind of like the tame Amazon, the tame Amazons for movies and stuff like that. The I don't know. Do you want me to talk about Amazon? I'll talk about it. So that illusion is comparing Grendel's mother to an Amazon warrior. You need to know what that is. So Amazon warriors were a race of women warriors. They were all warriors, and there were no men at all in their company. They were fierce with every weapon. They were to be feared by everyone. They were so fearsome that they didn't let anything interfere with their training on their weapons. I'm going to say this. How do I say this as delicately as I can? Well, the girls will understand. So women know that if you're ever going to use a tool or a piece of sporting equipment or a bow or a javelin or any kind of equipment, there's something that gets in your way. And it's your, as my 12-year-old niece would say, it's your chesticles. So you have trouble swinging a baseball bat, for example, or a golf club, because you've got to deal with that. Well, the Amazons were so fierce that they weren't going to let that impede their ability to be expert marksmen with a bow and arrow. So they just cut off one of their breasts. They left the other one because they needed to, you know, feed their children. But they would just literally only have one so that they could more freely use their weapons. So there's a priority there that's, you know, pretty strict. The Amazons did have children and get pregnant. What they would do is because they needed more of their race, so what they would do is they would go into nearby villages, sex up the men, and either kill them or enslave them, and get impregnated. And then when they gave birth, they would just kill all the boys and raise up the girls. And that's how they remained an all-female race. So yeah, they're pretty fearsome. And when Grendel's mother is compared to an Amazon warrior, all that's supposed to come into your head if you have the background, you know, of that illusion. So she's serious about her revenge. I skipped that for some reason. I'm sorry, I'm going out of order. I'm trying not to do that. Okay, so when she starts attacking him, it's immediate, and it's deadly. He has his chainmail on, and if it wasn't for that, he would have been gored immediately and died, because she's got these talons and she can't get them through the chainmail. So he survives, but she pins him down, and they go back and forth in their battle for a while. And the way that Beowulf ends up being victorious is through a term that you may or may not know called Deus Ex Machina. So Deus Ex Machina is a term in literature that from the Latin it means God in the machine. And it's sort of a way of solving a problem in a plot that isn't super realistic. You know, like he was in his last moments and then out of nowhere came the antidote, you know? So it's kind of like that sort of thing. And that's what happens here. Beowulf is looking like he's losing. It looks like Grendel's mother, in her fierce defense of her son, is going to win, but he ends up seeing this magic sword and in her armory, and he gets it, and you know, like the light shines down on it, he grabs it, and it's pretty much the only weapon that can be used to kill her, and he beheads her. So we call that Deus Ex Machina, because without the random interference of this weapon showing up, he was going to be goners. So he ends up beheading her, and he is victorious. Right here, the body gaped at the stroke dealt to it after death. Beowulf cut. Oh, this is when he goes to get the head. So the sword starts melting, and he has the handle and the head of. He goes and gets the head of Grendel, and he brings those up to the shore as sort of proof that he was able to kill the monster. Even though he has the arm of Grendel, he sort of, you know, always wanted the head. So he brings all of those up. Hrothgar's men had left, thinking that he was down there for a long time, and a lot of blood was kind of like coming to the surface, and they're like, doesn't look like your guy's gonna make it. But all of Beowulf's men stick around and they stay there because they know better. So he comes up and he lets them carry, it takes like 6 guys or something to carry the head of Grendel. And now they have all of these elements that prove that Beowulf has been victorious, and it was an astonishing sight. Then the part that you got to skip in the middle of today's reading is just about another celebration. They give him more more treasures, they have more feasting and so on and so forth. He explains what happens, and then after a while he leaves. This is still in the part that you didn't need to read, I'm just summarizing. After a while, the warriors are kind of like, you know what, we need to head back home, and so they load up all the treasure and say goodbye. Hrothgar gives him some advice, and he says, you know, things are going to happen for you. I don't highlight it, but let me see if I can find it. You're strong now. You said, like, you're me when I was younger. So recognize the fact that when you're older, you could be in my situation. unable to handle and needing help from the outside kind of thing, which does happen as he's battling the dragon. And so he gives him these treasures, and he lectures him a little bit on time and how fleeting it is. And Beowulf goes home, and he comes to the hall of his king, Heloc, and he's going to take the treasure. The queen's name is Hyde, in case you see that popping up somewhere. Hyde is married to Heloc. She's the queen. And there's a part where she's compared to this other, or contrasted with this other queen, because Hyde is very gentle and kind. This is all the part that you could also skip. Beowulf goes into his king and he recounts everything that happened with the battle with Grendel and Grendel's mother. He gives the king all of the treasures that he gained as a result of those victories. And Heloc is very pleased, and so on and so forth. I'm just kind of scrolling. I'm summarizing for you. So he says, here's all the horses and all the things that I was given. They're all for you. And the king gives him a certain amount of the treasure to keep for himself and some land. And he goes on his way. In the section, The Dragon Wakes, which is the next part where you're going to pick up from there, is, and then from here to the end, you should have read. So in this part, it's many, many years later. And in flashback, we find out that what happens is, over time, Heloc dies. His brother takes the throne. That brother dies, so Heoloc's son takes the throne. And then Beowulf becomes king. And then Beowulf is king for 50 years. So a lot of time is passing in the second half of the epic poem. It says a lot was to happen, and it talks a lot about battles. Specifically, let me go to that family tree thing. I'm hoping that you're using this to help you with the relationships between characters. So after Heloc, okay, so after Heloc dies, he dies in battle. Beowulf is in that same battle. After he dies, his brother Halfkin becomes king. There's another brother, Haribald, but he was killed in childhood. Halfkin killed him. Accident. It was a terrible accident, and that's mentioned later on. The grief of Hrethel in the fact that his one son killed his other son. But anyway, Halfkin becomes king. He dies in battle. Then Hardred becomes king. So this is the son of Heloc, but he's young. He's very young, and they offer the throne to Beowulf. All this happens in flashback in that section. And Beowulf refuses. He says, it's not right for me to take the spot of Hardred. Let him be king, and I'll advise him. So Beowulf, helps Hardred rule the kingdom, but then Hardred dies too. And so Beowulf becomes king, and then he's king for 50 years. So in this last portion, when Beowulf is fighting the dragon, he's old. I mean, he had to be at least, 20 when he was fighting Grendel and Grendel's mother? I mean, at least. And then he goes back, and let's say it takes 10 years conservatively for these different other kings to take their shot at the throne. So now he's 30, and then 50 years he rules peacefully. Nobody wants to fight Beowulf, so nobody attacks Geatland for 50 years. And now he's 70 at least, maybe even 80. So in the second part, when he fights the dragon, he's quite old. And so a lot of that section is about explaining how the kingdom passed through the different kings and how Beowulf came to be the final king of the Geats. They introduced right away the idea that there's this dragon, and there's a backstory with the dragon too. The dragon is upset because this dragon lives in a nearby cave that's near the, where the Geats are. And peacefully, he's lived there for many generations. I don't know how long dragons are supposed to live. Anyway, this guy stumbles into the dragon's cave and steals a little bit of his treasure. And the dragon doesn't like that. And so the dragon comes out and starts attacking the people. Now, this is already when Beowulf is old. There's a little bit of a flashback where they explain how the gold got there in the first place, because it's not really the dragon's gold. The dragon moved into the cave thinking that it was a nice cave because it already had treasure in it. And so the story goes back even further to explain how the gold got in there. And that's significant because it's foreshadowing and flashback at the same time. So it's a flashback to go back and say, how did the gold get into the cave in the first place? But it's also foreshadowing because the way that it got in there is because the last survivor of a people put the people's treasure into a cave. What else is he going to do with it? Everybody else has died out or been killed. So he puts the treasure of his people many years ago into this cave. Later on, the dragon comes and he says, oh, that looks like an awesome cave. I'm going to move in and all this treasure will be mine. And it is his treasure until that man steals, that thief steals that one cup. And it foreshadows the idea of the ending of a people, because that's what happens at the end. Beowulf thinks that he leaves his kingdom to, that he's been successful in saving them because of the treasure that he claims after the death of the dragon. But really, Beowulf, it doesn't set his people up for success. They take the treasure from the dragon and they bury it with him. And so I'll talk about that in a minute. So this is a foreshadowing and a flashback at the same time for that reason. So there's a description of the dragon. He's, typical dragon. He's got that fire breath and he goes and just keeps destroying parts of the village. Beowulf is originally not worried. He doesn't realize that he's having his Hrothgar moment where a creature is plaguing him and he has to do something about it. And this dragon keeps attacking. He says, I've been through lots of stuff before. It says the Prince of the Rings was too proud to line up with a large army against the Sky Plague. The Sky Plague is a description of the dragon. He had scant regard for the dragon as a threat, no dread at all of his courage or strength. He just said, I've seen monsters and creatures and all that stuff. It's not that big of a deal. But then the dragon starts lighting the town on fire and Beowulf's own home goes up in flames. This is a little bit of that flashback with Hrethel and the death of his son. I've been through all these griefs, I've been through all these problems, and so on and so forth. But when the dragon attacks, he decides that he's going to go ahead and fight it. And he even admits that he's old. Now I am old, but as king of the people, I shall pursue this fight for the glory of winning. So in the section Beowulf attacks the dragon, he decides he's going to go and fight the dragon now. Probably more to solidify his legend than to rid his people of the dragon. Because he fights by himself. He has soldiers, but he decides to dismiss them. And so the suggestion is pretty obvious that he wants the glory for himself so that he can be famous. The only way you can be famous is if people tell your story. So he's got this one last opportunity to do something extraordinary to be remembered. And so he says, I will pursue this fight if only the dragon will come out. And so he makes his boast. He orders his men to stay back. He's going to fight the dragon by himself, but right away that doesn't work. He says, I shall win the gold by my courage, and so on and so forth. He says all those great things that a hero king is supposed to say. And he battles with the dragon, but right away it's obvious that the dragon has the upper hand because he can barely get in close to the dragon with its fire breath and its enormous size. He gets close enough to strike the dragon at one point, but the sword doesn't do anything. The dragon's scales are impenetrable. So it's at that point that one of the warriors sees Beowulf struggling a little bit. And even though he was told to go and stay on the side, this warrior, Wilof, that's how you pronounce that, Wilof, decides that Beowulf needs help. And so it says, when he saw his lord tormented by the heat of his scalding helmet, he remembered the bountiful gifts bestowed on him, how well he lived among the Wegmundings. So he remembers that Beowulf made a good living for them. He made them free of attacks. Nobody wanted to attack Beowulf. He gave them their armor, and he gave them land, and he gave them everything that they had. And so this Wilof decides that he's going to go in and help Beowulf defend against the dragon. And so they go in to fight together. And before he goes in, though, Wilof gives a lecture to the other men that are waiting there just watching Beowulf fight the dragon. And he says, come on, let's go help Beowulf. He's our king. I remember in the mead hall, you all promised allegiance to him. Now's the time to pay. Sort of guilts them and does a little guilt trip. And he says, we pledged our loyalty to our lord in the hall, promised our ring giver we would be worth our price. Make good the gift of the war gear, those swords and helmets, as when his need required it. He picked us out, he gave us all this equipment. It's time now to pay him back. And so he goes, let's go. And he goes forward to meet up with Beowulf, and he's the only one who goes. He's very passionate. He even says, I would rather my body were robed in the same burning blaze as my gold giver's body than go back home bearing arms. Well, this guy sounds like Beowulf Jr., right? He sounds like another great warrior king. And he jumps into the fight. All the other men do not. So he goes in and tries to help Beowulf. And just as they're trying to fight against the dragon bites Beowulf on the neck, and that's his mortal wound. Not only is he losing blood because of the bite, but also there's a venom that the dragon has that starts to impair Beowulf. But he doesn't go down just yet because he's got to defeat the dragon. So the way that Wilof really helps is he gets up underneath the dragon and stabs the dragon in the belly, distracting and sort of starting the decline of the dragon. And Beowulf has a chance then to go in and stab it with a deadly wound. So Wilof assists Beowulf in the killing of the dragon. But at the same time, Beowulf is also suffering the effects of the venomous poison that's coursing through his body. And so he passes out and, is kind of laying there, and he tells Wilof, go and get the treasure for me. I want to see it, because he thinks that he's dying, leaving his people a great gift. In actuality, he's dying and his people are going to be extinct very soon, because he created, by doing all the battles himself, he created a very, very weak army. And so all the other countries are just waiting to attack Geatland until after Beowulf's dead. Nobody's going to attack him while he's alive, but as soon as he's dead, they're going to go and take it over, which is why if you look on a map, there's Sweden today and there's not Geatland. So he says, let me see the treasure, go and get it for me, and this is going to save my people. Wilof does that. He runs off to the cave. He goes and he gets something from the hoard. He brings it back and Beowulf looks at it. And these are the moments right before Beowulf is going to die. He gives his orders for the funeral. He says a few Christian things that were probably imposed by the writers. We already established that. And he says to Wilof, you're the last of us. This harkens back to that last man who put the treasure into the cave in the first place, the Wegmundings. It's probably like an old tribe of people, and Beowulf recognizes him as one of them. And his final words are, fate swept us away, sent my whole brave highborn clan to their final doom. Now I must follow them. And he dies. Very dramatic. Then they have his funeral, and so the book starts with the funeral of Shield, who goes off in that, they put him in that boat, and it ends with a funeral, the death of Beowulf, but it's a different type of funeral. Wiglaf, after Beowulf dies, he stays with Beowulf until he dies, and then Beowulf goes back to the men who would not help, and they're called shirkers in the text, because to shirk means to avoid your responsibility. And Wiglaf really gives them a talking to. He is extremely angry at them. He said, "This is the man who gave you everything, and you couldn't even help fight him in his moment of need." And then he says, "You don't even know the consequences of your inaction today." And this is an important line. "So it is goodbye now to all you know and love on your home ground, the open-handedness, the giving of war swords. Every one of you with freeholds of land, our whole nation will be dispossessed." In other words, now that Beowulf's dead, people are going to come and just tear our country apart and take our land and take everything from us, because they know that we're not going to defend it, because everybody will know how you turned and fled and disgraced yourselves. A warrior will sooner die than live a life of shame. So everybody's going to hear about how you wouldn't help Beowulf in his final battle, and so they're going to think we're an easy target, and they're going to take us over, and all of that's because you would not step up. So he lectures them for a while, and then they start the funeral preparations. He talks about how the Swedes are probably going to come and take over. They've wanted to for a long time. He refers to some other skirmishes and so on, but basically it's the Swedes that end up taking them over. Then they create a funeral pyre for him. They're going to burn him. So another funeral method is to burn the deceased and then place them into sort of a mound tomb that's built up over the earth, and put the remains of the person in there along with their possessions and their treasure and so on. So they set forth doing that. I have an image of it here. So Wiglaf starts giving those directions. Beowulf had talked to him about them, and they are going to build a pyre. Here's an image of a pyre I put on here. Maybe I can just move it over here. So this is an image of a funeral pyre. You can see that this is where the deceased's body is, and then fuel's placed on it and it's burned. It takes a long time for that to happen, so people oftentimes view it, sit around watching it, pay their respects that way. And then when the fire dies out and the body has been consumed, then they take the remains of the person, and it's a cremation basically, and they take the remains of the person and put it into the earth. Let me make this smaller again. And here's an example of a funeral barrow in Scandinavia. So you can see that they added earth and made like a man-made hill, and then they go in and they fortify the inside with timbers and mud and straw and stuff like that to make an internal space. And then that is a burial place for a person of note in the Anglo-Saxon tradition. These barrows are all over Scandinavia and England and places like that. They've all been looted because you could see a big mound, you could try to get into it and get treasure. But they're all over the place in people's backyards and stuff like that in Europe. So that's a burial barrow, which is kind of the thing where that they construct to put Beowulf's remains in. Beowulf said that he wanted to be buried on the headlands, so they put him on a cliff overlooking the sea, so that when people go by, they can say, "Oh, that's the burial place of Beowulf." And it ends with a remembrance of Beowulf as king, saying, "They said that of all the kings upon earth, he was the man most gracious and fair-minded, kindest to his people, and keenest to win fame." Well, of course, we've seen evidence of all of those things. And that is the end of Beowulf. Ta-da! Roll the credits. Hopefully I went through that at a pace that was good for you. Can you put any questions? I mean, I went over the basic stuff as I was going through it, but you know, you're responsible for reading all of the assigned parts. I didn't talk about everything. So maybe there's some spots that you had questions about that I didn't talk about. You can put those in the chat. I'm going to talk a little bit about Thursday, and then I'll see if there's anything in the chat for me to address. Thursday, we're moving on to the Middle Ages. So the first piece that we'll read from the Middle Ages is Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. Now in your text, there are 4 parts to that story. We're going to read part 1 and part 4. So on Thursday, we'll talk about part 1, which is pages 203 to 215 in the PDF. And I'll also summarize for you what happens in the middle part, because the following Tuesday, we'll talk about part 4. And it's kind of weird to read part 4 if you don't know what happens in part 2 and 3. I don't know why they did it that way, but I guess it's faster than reading the whole thing, I guess. Friday, I'm not going to talk about Gawain. It's a B week, so we do have class on Friday. I'm going to spend some time talking about the study questions from Beowulf and Gawain, and also I'm going to talk about the first discussion. The first discussion, graded discussion on the discussion boards, is due a week from Friday on the 22nd. And so I just want to show you a little bit about how that works, you know, what's expected and so on, so that you have like a week to have that roaming around in your thoughts before it's due. And then next week we will work on finishing up Gawain and starting on the Canterbury Tales. So I don't see anything in the chat. Is there anything that I forgot to talk about? You can tell me. Well, I hope that these overviews are helpful for you. I'm hoping that it's beneficial to at least hear me talk about the reading assignments. So we'll continue with that on Thursday with the first part of Gawain. All right, I guess that's it. If you have a question or something and you want to stick around behind, then please do so. Otherwise, I hope you have a great day. See you on Thursday.